All right, so let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good afternoon, well, good evening for you, Kevin. My name is Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C., from the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Kevin Godley accepted our invitation to our show. Kevin, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
No problem. Kevin, as you know, right, from the last 2 years has been very difficult for everybody with the COVID. Some people believe in the vaccine, some people don't. And how the COVID affected you, your life, inability to tour, your sanity. How you holding up?
On the surface, it hasn't really affected me a great deal because I'm not a hugely social animal. I don't go out a great deal, and I mostly work from home. So I suppose superficially it meant that I carried on doing what I was doing before. I just saw fewer people less often. And thank goodness neither myself or my wife have caught COVID.
Yeah.
So we've all had our vaccinations and boosters and so on and so forth. What it did do, I guess, was create an environment that told me I should be doing something as opposed to just letting the world wash over me. And I think we're talking probably 2019, 2020 now.
Yeah.
I guess I'd had the stirrings to try and make some solo music, which I'd not done before. I'd never done that before. Probably because I haven't felt confident enough to do it before, and I don't play an instrument. I don't play a guitar or keyboards, and the way I usually write songs with people is to sit opposite them while they play, and I respond to what they play with tunes and with lyrics, but that didn't exist for me, nor was it about to exist in the current climate of COVID.
Yeah.
So I think it was a year or two before, out of the blue, a couple of people who I didn't know sent me 2 pieces of instrumental music out of the blue and asked if I'd be interested in writing a song over the top of them.
Yeah.
And I did that, and I enjoyed the experience. So I thought, well, maybe that's a possible way to approach making an album, a Kevin Godley album.
Yeah.
Is to ask people, not people that I knew, but just put a general sort of open-ended ask out there into the cosmos.
Yep.
And see what came back. And so I did, and I was excited to find out that a lot of people would be interested in working with me as a writer. So I think I got about 300 or so pieces of music. I was expecting 50, 60 or something.
Yeah. Wow.
And I got a lot, and it was like, oh, how the hell am I going to decide what to do? But that was amazing. I'm not very technically minded. Traditionally, in a recording situation, I've been sat at the back on a sofa while someone was tinkering with a recording console and knew where to put microphones and plug things in. But I had to learn how to use things. I had to figure out how to use the simplest of devices, GarageBand, which I did, because all I was really going to do was add vocals to something.
Yep.
So I started going through the pieces of music that people had sent me, and I'd asked for sort of mixes, rough mixes. So I listened to things and I responded to them, and if I felt I could do something, I started to do something with them, and I eventually whittled that huge amount of stuff down to the finished, I think it was 10 or 12 pieces of music that I felt were going somewhere. And I took each one to a certain stage and then emailed the results back to the person who sent me the material, who I didn't know. And mostly they said, that's pretty good, carry on. And I just did. I kind of finished each one and everybody signed off on it. And so in one sense, it was a Kevin Godley album because I'd instigated the idea and the finished songs were my idea. But it was equally due to the music that I'd been sent, which was an incredible, diverse collection of music. And that was very stimulating for me because, I don't know, in a way, it was like sitting down opposite somebody and writing with them. But in this case, there was more to write to because it was almost like a mix of different instruments. Whereas when you write with somebody in the same room, it's one instrument, it's a keyboard or it's a guitar. This was different. And I didn't have to make anyone coffee all day. So it was different, but in many ways the same.
Yeah.
Because the tracks were so different, they had me thinking in different directions of how to respond to what I've been given. And I guess I was naturally driven lyrically by what was going on in the world at the time. And it was, as you rightly said, it was a very closed environment, a very closed world. And I was picking up what was going on in America at the time. I was catching things on the news. And this kind of stuff I don't usually write about, but it seemed important at the time. And indeed, it was important at the time. And so I jumped in to that world, the real world, with both feet. And came up with stuff that I thought was quite good. The album got well reviewed. I don't know how many it sold. That wasn't the point somehow. I guess I was trying to prove something to myself, prove that I could still do something, I guess, because I hadn't done something for a good while since working with Gouldman back in 2006. And it was a very satisfying experience.
Yeah. We'll later on we'll talk about the album. It's a very good album, and so I'm glad you did. I'm glad the people sent you stuff, and it's a very good album. It was, as you mentioned, it was very well received. And let's go back to the beginning of your life. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking, I don't know, guitar lesson or piano lesson? Bring me back to your childhood. So
not really. I remember when I was very young, my mom had a little piano in the house, and I think her brother had a sort of traditional jazz band, or was part of a traditional jazz band. The only other musical connection was my dad had a number of shops in Manchester where I was born.
Yeah.
And one of the shops sold musical instruments. One of the other shops sold records and tape recorders and radios and cameras. And so all the stuff that I would eventually get into lived in these shops in a strange way. And I remember I wasn't particularly interested in the musical instruments in the shop window. I used to go down into the basement where there was all sorts of peculiar bits of instrumentation that no one would put on show in a million years. Strange things called phonofiddles and bizarre drums and things. And I used to be fascinated by this. I must have been about 12, 13, 14-year-old at this time. So I was surrounded by stuff. But I eventually grew up knowing that I wanted to be some kind of artist. I wasn't particularly good at anything practical at school. I was hopeless at mathematics and geography and physics and chemistry and all that stuff. I didn't get that. The only thing that got through to me was art and music. In fact, I remember one incident when I must have been about 11 years old in school, and we used to have what they called music lessons, which essentially meant someone would come in and play a record to the class, mostly pieces of classical music that were considered to be good music by the music teacher. And we were supposed to talk about them. And on this particular day, the music teacher brought in an Elvis Presley record to illustrate, in her opinion, what ridiculous and stupid, horrible music is, as opposed to classical music. And she put this on, and I started banging the school desk like a drummer might, if a drummer knew what he was doing. And I got thrown out of the class. And I had to stand outside throughout the whole lesson. So I immediately connected Elvis Presley with being a bad boy. But it connected with me somehow. I mean, the sort of primitive nature of the sound was so opposite to what we've been taught was good music. It just connected me. It was the times, it was the chemistry, it was about being young, I guess, which is why rock and roll took off. And I guess it must have started from there. I started hanging around, started buying records and listening to music and feeling that sort of generational change that was just kind of kicking off in America and was gradually kind of finding its way over to England via Radio Luxembourg and so on and so forth. And I would lie in bed at night trying to tune the dial to find Radio Luxembourg and heard some amazing music that gradually became part of my DNA, I guess. And, you know, like any kid, we were all looking for cool things to do. What would be a fantastic, let's start a group. We all wanted to be in bands. All the kids I knew wanted to be in a band. So I think I persuaded my dad at some point to let me borrow a guitar from the music shop and have some guitar lessons. But I wasn't very good. I could play E, C, G, F, but I wasn't very good. And I joined the local band as a bass player, playing bass on a 6-string guitar. And we were terrible. The name of the band, I think, was Group 17. I've no idea why it was called that, because none of us were 17. And the drummer couldn't play drums. And I certainly couldn't play bass. And we played at house parties and old people's homes. And we were crap. We were awful. But it was great. There was something about that camaraderie of being in a group that fixed itself to me. And so everything, again, another layer was added to the joy of making some kind of music. And my neighbor, who was the drummer in the band, had been given a set of drums by his wealthy dad, and he couldn't play to save his life. He was one of those unfortunate kids who believed that you can just learn to play the drums, which you can to a degree, but you have to have that versatility of movement, that sense that most people, when they sit down behind a drum kit and lash out, they say, how do you do this? You're playing 4 different things at the same time. But what they don't get is that you're playing 4 parts of the same thing at the same time, and there's a world of difference. So one day he let me sit down behind the kit and try and play, and I had that independent suspension thing. I could play this there and that there and get a couple of feet doing things that made sense. So I switched to drums at that point, even though I didn't have a kit really. But I ended up borrowing bits of kits. And I had at home, I had a cymbal on a stand and a pair of sticks for a while, and that was it. But I just knew that was my instrument.
Yeah, good for you, man.
Yeah.
So you were very young at the time, and you knew at the time that, well, you didn't know that you want to be a drummer, but that you wanted to follow, like, for music to be part of your life, or was kind of family pressure to, hey, forget about music, you're not going to make any money, go to university, follow a career like your dad or a business or whatever, or
if you
it was a conversation with your parents? Or?
If you think about it logically, it was what you just said. It was a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
But there was no sense that I'd ever be a professional musician. It was just, I guess it was like kids who play video games and go skateboarding now. It's like it's something you do for fun.
Yeah.
And of course, your parents, whose job it is to make sure that you travel through life safely, were trying to persuade me to come into the family business, take over where my dad left off, or do something useful. So I guess, as the only thing that I was good at school was art, I ended up going to art school.
Yeah.
I think it wasn't as clear to me as it was to my mum and dad. They wanted me to go to art school to study, to get a degree, so I could become a professional graphic designer. That was the reason I went to art school. I didn't go to art school to learn how to dance, take drugs, and have a good time. That was what actually happened at art school, as well as learning a bit about graphic design.
Yeah.
But being at art school in the sort of early to late 1960s was a petri dish of all sorts of new ways of looking at things at that period of time. And one of those was music. It was an eye-opener to be at art school during that time. Everything was moving towards you coming up with something that was about yourself, finding your true nature, being innovative, original, whatever area of art you ended up doing. And I loved that. I relished it and stayed at art school for as long as I possibly could. And the same was true of Lol Creme, who was also at art college at that time. We'd sort of teamed up a few years before this, and we were at different art colleges, but we used to get together at weekends and write music and think of ideas for crazy live shows and goodness knows what else. In fact, I remember he was at Birmingham College of Art and I was at Stoke-on-Trent College of Art. He actually drove down to where I was living in Stoke with a Hammond organ in the back of a van, and we'd set the Hammond organ and Leslie up in the front room of where I was living and play all night. It was I suppose it's classic stuff when you talk about it now, but we were crazy for it. We loved the experience of writing music. And so I guess during the day I was a very thoughtful and considerate graphic design student, but in the evenings, by then I joined a band with Gouldman called the Mockingbirds.
Yep.
And we go off around the country in a shitty old van playing gigs at horrible little clubs. So I was living a kind of dual life. But I have to say, looking back on it, driving around the country in a shitty van and playing gigs was a lot more fun than learning to become a graphic designer. So I think that the scene was set And we started recording stuff in a very crude way, basic way back then, because Graham, we all knew each other on the same group of people back there. And Graham became our mentor, if you like, and liked the songs that we were writing. So he invited us around to his place to record them on an old Revox 2-track, which was our first experience of recording anything. And again, that lifted it slightly, into the realms of, oh, that's even more exciting. And there's a record out now with some of those tracks on it.
Yep.
Which,
yeah, we'll talk about that. So you and Lol Creme were a fantastic team. Together you produce an amazing artistic output. Can you tell us a little bit and how you met and starting collaborating, and then what led to a good friendship for many years?
Yeah, we met. Gosh, I must have been 14, 15 or 16.
Yeah.
I borrowed an 8mm film camera.
Yep.
And wanted to make a film. I wanted to make Dracula on 8mm. I was going to play Count Dracula.
Yeah.
But I needed a hunchback. I needed Igor, the hunchback.
Yeah.
Being Dracula, which was wrong from the start because there was no Igor in Dracula. Igor was in Frankenstein. So I was fucked up from the start, really, but I thought it'd be great. Who do I know who could play this character? So I asked a few people, and they said, you want to go meet Lol Creme? He'd be perfect.
He will be perfect for the part.
Yeah, and indeed he was. He was very funny. He was a very funny guy, and we got on really well. So I filmed him, and he pulled a few faces and assumed the position. And we never got to finish the film, but we formed a bond over things we liked and the music that we liked. He was a guitar player, and so we started writing together. But that was only part of the equation. It wasn't strictly about that. It was really about two kids who were both at art school, who felt that we could come up with some ideas. The art world, the performance world needs a kick in the arse, and we're just the two people to give it that kick. So we'd spend the weekends not only writing songs, but coming up with ideas for musicals and stage shows and books and goodness knows what. We'd fill notebooks full of mad ideas, and of course we could both draw quite well because we were art students, and they were very kind of creatively fruitful years. So it was a very creative partnership from the off.
That was way before the internet. So were you writing like a notebooks, like the art, the art kits, the architecture kits, right, stuff?
Paper, pen and pencil.
Yeah.
And I guess the thing was, we wrote everything down.
Yeah.
But we found that, particularly with writing songs, we found that if you could remember it for longer than 10 minutes, then it was okay. We could carry on working on it. If you forgot it after 10 minutes, it wasn't worth it. No, it just wasn't there, whatever it was. And of course, we were inspired by what else was going on in the world musically. We were inspired by the Beatles. I remember we'd been writing at weekend, and we were both due to go back to college, so which we did. I drove back to Stoke-on-Trent on the Monday and walked into college. And this was when Sgt. Pepper had just come out, and everybody at the college had bought it. Every department in the art school was playing a track from Sgt. Pepper, And that was, you know, the sort of printmaking department, the photography department, the sculpture department, the fine art department. All different rooms, all around the college, all playing a different track. Work had effectively stopped in the college. And the tutors and the students were poring over the gatefold sleeve and reading the lyric. It was like the whole, it was insane. It was insane because that particular record changed everything. It changed everything. It was, I mean, Elvis, when Elvis came along, he opened a crack in the world and he pushed it open. It was, if it was a door, he pushed the door open a bit. But when that record came out, Sergeant Pepper, it was like the Beatles kicked the door off its hinges. And it was like anything was possible. And so, okay, if anything's possible, let us in. And we walked through that door and started thinking in different ways and actually getting a little bit more serious about it. I think it was also the fact that, you know, these guys had come up from nothing, from Liverpool, and they'd been resolute and stuck to their guns about what they wanted to do. And they changed the nature of the music business. I mean, I can't stress enough how what they did was influential. Not just the music, every single thing about the Beatles. They used their own names, which was unheard of at the time. Everyone had stage names. Their hair was different to everybody else's. Their instruments were different to everybody else. They were natural where everybody else was kind of choreographed. They had a very unique sense of humor. And they were from Liverpool, which was down the road a bit from Manchester. And it was like, that could have been us. But they were brave enough to follow whatever their dream was turning into, and follow it and follow it and follow it. And what came out of this was a new form of music business. Don't forget, before then, bands or artists didn't write their own music. Writing was something that was done by songwriters, who then passed their songs to publishers, who would look for artists who would sing their particular songs. So there was a hierarchy. That was all destroyed instantly. An artist could write his own songs. Wow, okay, we'll do that. They opened so many doors. And as we shifted through the late 1960s into the 70s and beyond, suddenly, well, not suddenly, but gradually, the lunatics were running the asylum. That's what it felt like. And so, and the business people, the people who lived in the old Tin Pan Alley style of music business, didn't know what the hell was going on, which was incredible. So all sorts of people were becoming successful because they were kind of tapping directly into a sense of this new generation, which I think had been floundering a little bit on the end of the 1950s and 60s, and were looking for something that represented the future. And that was kind of the beginning of the future. And I guess we were grabbing onto the coattails of what we saw was the future and enjoying doing so.
Wow. And then probably you and Lol thought, well, you know, if the Beatles can do it, coming from Liverpool, you were not as far from Liverpool in Manchester, and then they were writing their own lyrics. They didn't come from wealthy families. The two of you, or you thought maybe we can give that a try. You were, you know, crazy enough like them, right? You were a rebel, and then, you know.
Well, I think it was because it was the two of us together. We had each other to bounce off and support.
That's right, yeah.
So if we got criticism and stuff, we'd listen, and then we'd tell people to fuck off in the nicest possible way, because we because of the way things were going, I guess we instinctively felt that there was a place for what we were doing. At some point in the coming years, we'd find our niche, which that's pretty much what happened.
Yeah. You got to be a dreamer to accomplish anything, right? So
you got to have some kind of we had a dream. It wasn't that clear.
Yeah.
It was a bit all over the place.
Yeah.
But we instinctively felt that whatever the hell was going on out there, we could contribute to it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah.
Yeah. Recently, recently an album called Frap Juice Days, the Secret World of Godley and Creme was released. Can you tell me about this release and the pre-tendency period?
Yeah, well, okay, so they're very early. These are the songs that a lot of them were the stuff that we recorded at Graham's house on his 2-track Revox.
Yeah.
Initially, anyway. But at some point during that period, Lol and I wrote a song called "To Fly Away," and I forget the circumstances surrounding it, but we ended up in a studio in London recording it as a test. I can't recall. You have to forgive my memory on all this. It's a long time ago.
It's okay.
For Giorgio Gamelski, who started a label called the Marmalade label. Giorgio was a big guy in the business by now. He managed the Rolling Stones, the Yardbirds, a lot of big bands. And he was starting this label anyway. We ended up down there. I think what had happened is we'd recorded this at Graham's house, and maybe Graham had played it to him or something. So I ended up down there singing it, and we sang it and recorded it. And Giorgio liked my voice and wanted us to do some more stuff. And he included "To Fly Away" on a thing that he put out called the Marmalade Sampler, which was a track from every band that he had on the Marmalade label at the time. But the intention was for Godley and Creme to make an album of our songs. And the songs that you hear on Frap Juice were the songs that we sort of tentatively recorded initially at Graham's house, I think, at the time. So we were asked to come down to London to record them properly. The only unfortunate aspect of it was that he wanted to call us Frab Joy and the Runcible Spoon, which we thought Godley and Creme was more authentic. But, this is the first opportunity to record something and get something out to the world. We're not going to argue. So off we went, and we went down to London and recorded, I think it was at Advision Studios. And Graham came as well, and he played bass on the session. And I don't remember it, but Graham, apparently Eric Stewart came and played some guitar on the sessions. The sessions were produced, the music was produced by a guy called Tony Meehan, who was the drummer in Cliff Richard's band, The Shadows, at the time, but he was also an arranger. He arranged it. It was our first taste of working in a real recording studio in London. And that was an eye-opener. I mean, that was incredible. I mean, 2 kids down from Manchester for a few days recording in a proper recording studio. It was like, wow. So we did this. We recorded our songs and we went home. And unfortunately, the album never came out because Marmalade went under as a label. And so did Giorgio. I don't know what happened to Giorgio, but so these songs were lost until I wrote an autobiography, an e-book a few years ago called Space Cake. And one of our diehard fans had found these pieces of music and I put them on a CD, and he sent them to me. So I sort of lifted them off and put some of them in the book itself. And, book came out, blah, blah. A few years later, John Reed it was last year, I think, John Reed from Cherry Red Records got in touch with me and said, we'd like to put these out on an album. So it was like, okay.
Do it.
Godley and Creme, music from the pram. It's sort of a very bizarre feeling, but some of them aren't bad. They sort of captured the spirit of who we were and the times.
Absolutely, yeah.
And showed an inkling of what we'd eventually turn into. So we agreed. And people seem to like them.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. You have been doing countless sessions working at Strawberry Studios in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And then I think you end up collaborating on 2 of the Neil Sedaka's album. And then, feel free to, try to create your own band. Please tell us how the ideas of 10cc came about and what was Jonathan King's role at the beginning of the band.
That was his idea. That was Neil's idea to form a band. We never even thought of it. We kind of became the house band at Strawberry Studio, but house producers, and we produced anything that came through the door. We kind of learned about the mechanics and what producing is. I think it's the wrong word. I think the title record producer really should be record director, because that job is much more like a director than a producer, if you understand what I mean.
Yeah, I do. No, I do, yeah.
And we were quite good at it, a good sort of team. But Neil, after we worked with Neil in a different way, we were like a band, because it was recorded very simply, both those albums. We played as a band together in the studio live with Neil playing. And he said, you guys are really good playing together. You should form a band. But it hadn't really occurred to us seriously. Myself, Lol Creme and Eric Stewart briefly had a band called Hotlegs in 1969. We had one hit in the UK called Neanderthal Man. And then we couldn't get any further. So that's when we really fell into being a production unit and a session band. But when Neil suggested it, we thought, okay, we'll have another go. And Eric and Graham had written a song called Waterfall, which we recorded, which Apple Music were interested in briefly, but we needed a B-side for it. So Lol and I wrote a thing called Donna as the B-side, but it was more interesting than Waterfall. And eventually ended up being picked up by Jonathan King's label. I forget what the label was called. My memory's going. But that was our first record as 10cc, a name which he came up with. That was a hit record. It went to number 2 in the UK charts. And everything kind of kicked off from there.
And all of a sudden you were famous.
So I wouldn't say that. Embarrassing. I remember in Manchester, we were suddenly a bit famous, but much to my humiliation, we were still young guys. So Lol and I bought a couple of cars. We went away on a holiday. We bought a couple of cars, a couple of white Lotus Plus 2S's, and I pulled into this local garage, where I've been going to for years to fill it up. And I did. And I was, standing outside feeling very starry. And I locked myself out of the car. And I couldn't get in my car. So that was a lesson in humility very early on.
Yeah. Well, you did all right. You never went back to your family business, right? You ran your dad companies, and you were on your own doing well, so.
We were doing okay. It was very early days. And I remember all the way through this process, my dad was like, oh God, it's not music business. It's not going to go anywhere. You're not going to do anything. And so it was like, until we had a hit record.
That's right.
Then it was on the pop star.
Yeah.
And that syndrome, which was kind of sweet, really, because I guess if you do something that's successful to people from his generation, that is the thing. It's not so much what you do, it's the fact that it is successful. So suddenly I was successful in his eyes, and I'd actually made something of myself. So that was important, you know?
Mm. Yeah, no, I understand. You know, 10cc at the beginning was a brilliant band full of ideas and creativity. What was your goal? The main goal early in the beginning when you guys formed the band? I mean, you were listening to a lot of bands at the time, and you know, why 10cc at the beginning was different than all the other bands around? Why you guys have as a success criteria or a strategy to be different and do well in life? What, you know, people form band because they want to be like this or be like that or be different like that or be different like that. What was the kind of goal or motivation or strategy for you guys to turn into a good band?
It's a difficult thing to pin down, but I remember, this is going back just before 10cc. I think anybody who starts making music and recording music at the very beginning of their life doing that, they naturally refer to the kind of music they consider to be good music, and they unconsciously kind of will copy that to a degree. Because, you know, like the Beatles were role models to us. So a lot of the early stuff we did was kind of Beatley, you know.
Yeah.
So I guess part of us was saying, oh, we want to be the Beatles, which is ridiculous because we couldn't be the Beatles. But you find out even then, when you start recording stuff, wanting it to sound like somebody else, it doesn't, because it can't, it never will. But something else will appear during that process that is you. And I think we began to sense this, but the moment where I suppose we became 10cc was after the failure of our second single, which was called Johnny Don't Do It, which again was kind of like a doo-wop pastiche, like Donna was. Donna was a number 2 hit. So we thought, stupidly, we should do something similar. And we did, and it didn't do anything at all. But they wanted us to make an album. So we did. But we were given a very short space of time to do it, about 3 to 4 weeks, to write and record an entire album. So our critical facilities went out the window. Whereas before we'd labor over a particular song for days or weeks on end, we threw caution to the winds, and we'd come up with something, and if we liked it, we'd finish it and we'd record it. And then we'd come up with something, and it kind of didn't matter how mad it was or how bizarre it was. We'd finish it and we thought, interesting, we'll record it. Because we were in a hurry and we were working off intuition and feeling, as opposed to referring to stuff that we thought was good. Does it stack up against this? Is it as good as that? We weren't thinking like that. In fact, I don't think we're thinking in that way at all. We were just, essentially, we were recording what came out. And what actually happened during that process at the end of the weeks is that the stuff that we'd recorded didn't sound anything like anybody else. It had humor in it. It was witty. The sounds were kind of different. It had something of the stuff we liked, but it was more daring. It sort of moved into areas that other people weren't dabbling with at the time. And I think that is down to a number of factors. The main one being we weren't in London. So we didn't have a record label executive coming in every week, looking over our shoulders and saying, you can't do this, you can't do that, you need that to be shorter, you need not to have the word fuck in the chorus, and all sorts of things. We just followed our instincts. And in so doing, we came up with something that was bright and sparkling and different. And it included Rubber Bullets, which was a huge hit. But we knew we didn't know everything. We knew just enough to have confidence to do it.
And then, so you were given 3 or 4 weeks to put it together. You know, there were not management telling you this or that, but no. You guys finished, and then how whoever was paying and giving you money to put the 3 to go to a studio and then spend 3 or 4 weeks putting it together. And the album obviously was very different. What you guys were doing very different. How it was well received at the time by whoever was putting the money?
I think so. I think it was Jonathan's label. London Records. I can't remember the name of the label. But yes, it for a first album from a band, it got pretty well reviewed. There was some interesting stuff on there. It was pretty crazy. And as a 4-piece unit, we were very kind of democratic. We'd do anything, you know. It wasn't, well, that's not cool enough. That needs to be bluesier. That sounds daft. Let's not do that. Because we were in a hurry, we try anything, you know. And that way of working kind of stayed with us because it provided a template, if you like, for the 4 of us to deliver what we could deliver.
And then, in a way, kind of prove a couple of things, right? That you could do it. You discover your own niche. You were not the Beatles, but you were in your own. And then 3, the 4 of you got along kind of well, I suppose. And they were the democratic group of 4 kids putting something different together. And then out of London, like you mentioned. So everything was great, I suppose, right? I mean,
it was perfect.
Yeah.
In that, I don't know, I believe that I come up with my best stuff when I don't quite know what I'm doing. When I've sort of got one foot on safe, dry ground, but I've got the other foot in a big hole.
That's right, yeah.
I don't know if I'm going to topple in or not. And it was kind of like that. We didn't know what we were doing. All we knew was that we were doing something. And it sounded interesting. And no one was saying that we couldn't do it. So off we went.
Yeah. In a way, that's in life, right? When you are a little kid, you are 4 or 5 years old, and your parent would tell you, well, don't put the finger in the electricity socket or don't play with knife in the kitchen. You kind of, the world's are your oyster. So you're full enough. You're 4, you don't know the rules of the world or the rules of engagement, and you did it. I mean, it's a beautiful thing to be innocent, and it's a beautiful thing to not be in London and not have a manager or
Yeah. And we supported each other. Once someone would come up with an idea, that's great, but what if you did this?
Yeah.
That gets better. And someone added this, that's even better. And
yeah,
hang on a minute, if we change the shape to this, it's even better stuff. It was a very creative period of time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. What do you, looking back, if you can recall, what do you consider were the high point of those, 4 albums that you work with? Looking back now, 40, 60 years ago, or 40, 50 years ago, what, if you can?
For those 4 years, for those 4 albums.
Yeah.
From a writing point of view, personally, the song I like the best was something called Somewhere in Hollywood, which I think was on the second album, Sheet Music.
Yeah.
But the track that we all worked on together that I think was a culmination was I'm Not in Love. I think everyone would probably agree with me on that, because we were still being very adventurous. We were still chancing our arm, as they say, and finding new ways to express ourselves. And recording that particular track, the way we eventually ended up doing it, was a revelation, even to us, that it was possible.
Yeah.
So maybe those two tracks, somehow, I think.
Yeah. That's a masterpiece, by the way.
That's a what?
A masterpiece.
Thank you. Well, it was mental. I mean, I'm Not in Love, we recorded it.
Yeah.
First, as a cheesy bossa nova when it sounded terrible. So we were like, oh, put it in a drawer till later. And we carried on recording other stuff for that album. I think it was the original soundtrack. But we knew there was something in it. And so we were determined to come up with a way of doing it. And we eventually pulled it out again and sat down and talked about it. And I suggested, why don't we do it all with voices? And I think I said it out of desperation, just to come up with something unusual and different to try. And everyone said, okay, how? And then Lol suggested using tape loops. So okay. And all that process took about 3 weeks to gather all the notes and all the recordings and so on and so forth, just to create the tape loops. And I think sort of going on underneath that was, we had a practical job to do. Let's get on with it. Maybe we'll come up with a better idea while we're actually doing this, but we didn't. And when it came to the crunch and we started putting all these elements together, something magical happened. And that kind of magic doesn't happen very often. It was like another light was switched on in the room. It was a moment.
Yeah.
We knew we had something special. And the sessions for that whole track, I don't know how many sessions there were, but again, it was special because every time we added something to the recording, it made it better. There was no point where we stuck something on and it was shit, and we have to come up with something else. Everything we put on was good. And even when we took things away, it got better. It was quite extraordinary. The only problem we had was it was about 6 minutes long. But we wouldn't edit it. We refused to edit it because it was uneditable, because the chords were all going on at the same time with the voices. You couldn't put scissors in there. It was an impossibility, and it was a huge hit.
Absolutely, man. Was any pressure nowadays, or some years ago or 20 years ago, record label would put pressure on you? Well, we need to do commercial stuff. We want to play in the radio, need to be less than 4 minutes. Forget about 6 minutes song. It wasn't nothing like that back in the day, or
no, because I don't recall any, and I think that's because that most of the singles we put out turned it into hits.
Yeah.
So they probably thought, well, they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing, right? So
we didn't, but they thought we did. But I think that maybe by then we kind of did. No, it wasn't like we didn't take direction very well, but I don't think any of the labels that we were on felt the need to coach us in any way, because there was something in our collective psyche that liked some of the commercial elements. We had a commercial element in us, even though we didn't think it was commercial. I could never pick what a hit was at all. But there was something that we had in our joint capabilities that had what was necessary, I guess.
I mean, there was a lot of, I suppose, a lot of magic. If Graham was not there or you weren't there, it had been different for kids arguing, and this, perhaps none of this album would have been made. I mean, the fact that, I don't know, Destiny or, kids coming out of Manchester that were crazy enough, well enough, foolish enough to make something on their life, and that's what it's about, I suppose, right? Magic, in my opinion, is like music. In my opinion, is like magic. I mean, things click well together, and then the output is unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I would think of it in a slightly different way. I mean, because I know the different forms that tracks went through to get to the finished thing that you've heard, or the audiences heard, and they could have turned out differently. That verse could have said something different to the verse in the finished thing. So who knows whether that would have had any effect on the result of people hearing it. You never really know that. You can't really think about that either. That's. I mean, I'm sure people do, and I'm sure that's part of the commercial process in normal terms in bands that are guided by labels. But there are artists that had something that didn't require. I mean, Kate Bush is a supreme example of coming up with fantastic music over and over and over again that people fell in love with. So leave it alone. You don't need to water that plant. It's growing fine. And I think to a degree we were kind of a bit like that. The one thing that we didn't have was we didn't have anything going in the visual department at all. And I think when I look back on it, it didn't mean much at the time, but when I look back on it now, it's kind of strange that we didn't, because you had 2 art students in the band, and we never actually got to grips with that side of presentation. We always saw ourselves probably more as studio musicians who occasionally went out on tour, and we never really put any effort into creating a visual template for the performance. And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I think we may have suffered for that in the long run.
Yeah, at the time, remember that bands like Genesis, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin, or whatever, they were putting a lot of effort into the lighting and the design. I mean, 50% is music. We need to be good for people to pay pounds to see us, but the other 50 were having projection, the lighting system, like a lighting design. We need to be foggy a little bit, and weird colors like green or red for the people drink beer and then whatever they do, and then listen to good music at the same time.
Yeah, that's right. We didn't. I remember once, I think we played somewhere, and Queen was supporting us.
Wow.
Okay, they were playing support. Wow. And they went on first and had a fucking amazing light show.
Yeah.
And our light show was an on and off switch. It was like it was pathetic. But we didn't learn. I think there was something in our psyche that said, "Oh, we're purists, man. We don't do stuff like that," which was wrong for the kind of music that we were making.
Of course, yeah.
It was a disconnect. That's probably how it's because it was something that was inside me and Lol that we not discarded, but we put to one side. Throughout the 10cc years, we hadn't done anything of a visual nature for a good many years. We were purely sound and songwriting and recording and playing, and so anything visual all the visual stuff we were coming up with and ideas in our early years were somehow outside the remit of 10cc.
Yeah.
Very bizarre. Until later.
Is there always, when the band is doing well and then you're touring, although you guys get along very well, there's fights inside the band and you want to create different type of music and Lol want to do something different, and then you say, well, I cannot force you guys to take this band into a particular direction. And then you say, well, I want to take leave and try to do other things. It was difficult to, I suppose, I don't know, Peter Gabriel, right? When he decided to leave Genesis and say, well, I like doing Genesis, but there is another side of me that want to do something different, right? And I cannot force, I suppose, Genesis to do that. And let me take like a year off for the band, try these things out, because if I don't do it, then I will always be unhappy in my life, right? You look at yourself at the mirror and say, well, I want to try something, right? But I cannot force the band to do it. It was yourself alone was kind of thinking about something like that. I mean,
we did. We had exactly that happen to us. I mean, we were a big band by then, and we'd been touring, and we had a reputation. We had people working for us. We had a road crew. And all the trappings of a relatively successful band. But even back in the day, before 10cc, during the brief Hotlegs period, Lol and I had invented this device called a gizmo.
Right. Yep.
And we'd never really had time to test its capabilities. Not really. We'd used it on a couple of tracks in 10cc, but not much. And we'd invented this thing, and we came to a natural place where we'd stopped recording, we stopped touring, and we were twiddling our thumbs for a bit, I think. So Lol and I thought, well, maybe we can go into the studio for 3 weeks, book some time at Strawberry, and see what we can do with this thing, which is pretty much what we did. We didn't go in there with the thought of breaking the band up or anything. It was just something that, as Peter had that necessity to get it out of our systems in some way. So we did precisely that. And at the end of that period of time, we were so excited about it. We kind of wanted to carry on and do some more. But it was coming up to record a new 10cc album time. We were due to deliver a new album, if I remember correctly. And while we'd been in the studio, Eric and Graham had been writing and come up with a song or two. It was like, okay, well, let's hear what you've done, with a view to jumping back in. So we all convened at Strawberry Studios, and Graham and Eric played the song to us. That sound you can hear now in the background is the pouring rain on the roof of my studio. Can you hear it?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. Yeah, I do.
White noise, but I can't do anything about that, unfortunately.
That's right. Yeah.
So, and I forget which song it was. It was The Things We Do for Love, or it was a song like that. It was a sort of a jolly little commercial ballad. And Lol and I at the time were heavily into this sort of heavy instrumental music, orchestral music. And our heads were totally into it. And this sounded, it was like a switch had been flipped. It was like, we don't want to do this. We don't want to do this. Can we pause here and take a year off and finish this project? You guys carry on. We need to do this. But for whatever reason, there was a timing we needed to deliver a new 10cc album. We had a staff, you know, with expectations for 10cc. The timing must have been poor because everyone said, no, you can't do that. Put it on one side again and come back to it some other time. We have to go back to the main business of being 10cc again. And I think our first thought, well, can we kind of bring this project into the band or combine it with the band in some way? No, because like, if we get cut off, if we get cut off, it would be because it's power cut. Okay, just let you know.
Sorry, couldn't hear you.
If the power goes out, there may be a power cut here.
I got you. Yeah, I got you. Yeah.
It's not me switching off. There may be a power cut.
I understand. Yeah.
Wow. So anyway, the bottom line was that we could not. We had to come to a decision, Lol Creme and I, whether we wanted to do this mad project at the beginning, or whether we wanted to go back to recording what we felt was very predictable music for 10cc. And I think by then 10cc had become, we knew what 10cc was. And for me, at least, and for Lol, to the same extent, the fun of going out of it, that sense of discovering something new each time we went into the studio had evaporated to a degree. But we were getting it from the Gizmo project. So the decision that had a lot of ramifications had to be made. We had to walk, we had to bail, which is precisely what we did. And superficially, it was a completely wrong thing to do because the album, although it was a lot of fun to make, was poorly timed, it was poorly marketed, and the actual product did not fit the times at all. It came out just after punk, a new wave had become the thing. And so suddenly we were yesterday's men, whereas Eric and Graham were still having hits. And so it was like a complete and utter, not musical disaster, but commercial and business decision disaster that had us going back to the start as Godley and Creme. So it wasn't a good time. We had a great time making the album, but it was the first time for a long time that something we put out didn't have legs, you know?
Yeah, that's the risk, I suppose, that people need to take in life, and but you need to take this risk because otherwise you couldn't look yourself in the mirror and say, well, I want to do certain things, and I'm comfortable and safe playing with this band. I get on very well with you guys, more money to be made there, but I need to gamble and try these things, right? And I suppose that that's the only way to live life, that by try things out, right? Don't be stupid, right? But don't jump out of the building to see how it's like, but be foolish enough to try different things.
We've never played safe.
Yeah.
We've never played safe.
Yeah.
But suddenly, I think it was suddenly there was more at stake. From the line. There was more at stake at this point.
Yeah.
In hindsight, we made the right decision. But it took a few years to find our way back to something.
Yeah. And also I think it's a few years ago a new version of Gizmotron 2, I think it was, is currently marketed, is that correct?
Well, everything we ever recorded with it was the original. It was the original piece of equipment that had been made by the Manchester College of Science and Technology. It was the test version.
Yeah.
It was manufactured by a company out of New York and Flushing, I think. But unfortunately, again, the timing was poor. By the time they'd done all their R&D and got the thing out into the market, cheap synthesizers were becoming the thing. And the Gizmotron was a very delicate piece of equipment. It would sound like a chainsaw if it wasn't calibrated correctly, or the temperature could affect it, or the way you actually put it in the guitar case could affect it. So it wasn't an easy instrument to deal with. And so a few interesting people used it. Everyone from Jimmy Page to Susie and the Banshees to Paul McCartney, they used it, but not enough to make it a commercial product, if that makes any sense. We continue to use it every now and again when we're recording Godley and Creme stuff. But I mean, those years were difficult. Starting it then was difficult.
Yeah. But you guys did okay. I mean,
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, in hindsight, everybody can change the world, right? But sometimes as I said before, life is about taking risk, I suppose, right? So
it is about, and it's about juggling things. It's about looking at.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's not about thinking at all. Again, it just felt like the right thing to do at the time.
Yeah.
And so we did it, and we enjoyed doing it, and we paid the price.
Yeah.
But so doing it took us in a different direction.
Absolutely.
Thank goodness.
No, absolutely. You have said that when you were working on the Consequences album in the mid-70s, I think you were quoted to say music was about detail, refinement, and exploration. And then everything was turned upside down by the punk movement, or something along the line. Right?
I love that. It was like if we'd have been 18, 19-year-olds and not who we were at that time, that's probably what we would have been doing. So I kind of got it. I got the vibe, and I was kind of jealous that we were stuck in this precious, expensive, detailed, beautiful orchestral world, trying to create something that wasn't going to be as valid as we thought it was going to be. But we were trapped. We were kind of like 3/4 of the way through the project. So we couldn't just walk away. We had to take it to its conclusion. But I felt that there was something stalking us, by then. And I was right. When we emerged from the studio with the finished thing, it was like we were like two Japanese soldiers that had been lost in the forest for 10 years after the Second World War. We kind of didn't know what hit us. The world changed, We were aware of it, but, not as aware as we should have been.
Wow, yeah.
Did you see that?
Yeah.
Oh. Rolling Thunder.
Yeah. You wanna continue, or we can finish this part now and then do part 2 tomorrow? Or would you prefer?
It's up to you. I think it's going to continue like this. Let me just check the
Yeah, take your time. Yeah, I will pause the recording. So go and check. Yeah. Let me continue. I did a pause. Yeah, we can continue tomorrow. There's a lot of things, very interesting stuff that we need to talk about. So
let me check the weather forecast for tomorrow.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be better tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's going to be better tomorrow.
Yeah.
So, should we say the same time?
Yeah, but the same time tomorrow, that will be great.
Will you send me another link?
I will, of course I will. I'm
Okay.
enjoying myself, and
Yeah, me
hope
too.
you enjoy yourself too, and we are reviewing your whole life. I'm like
Okay.
I'm like a psychologist, Kevin. I ask question over and the question, and people reflect on their life, and I'm recorded. It's good stuff. So
That's fine. I'm glad I'm giving you what you need.
yeah. All right,
Okay.
great.
I'll
Have a
look
good
out.
night and a safe night, and we'll talk tomorrow.
Okay, look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, bye. Have a good night.
Goodbye.